Hey everybody, it's Professor Snard here checking in. It is Tuesday, October 22nd, kind of windy, miserable, rainy weather outside. Not so terrific, but hopefully it turns around in time for Halloween, everyone's favorite. And here we are in our course. All right, so we are in the midst of our poetry units in our Intro to Lit class. So just looking at our due dates here. Finished up some stuff with poetic forms, including sonnets and people doing some research about various other forms. Thinking about the connections crossover between poetry and lyrics or music. As I'm recording it, it's Tuesday, so we're just sort of wrapping that up, some time for replies. And then I'm going to jump into our last poetry unit, it's Poetry Everywhere. Again, the usual setup here, and then we jump into our final units covering drama and sort of our final things here. We actually have just passed midterm in our 12-week, session here. But honestly, especially with Thanksgiving and, things just sort of ramp up at this time of the year, whether it's, the holidays coming up and people are trying to arrange travel and working more, and everything in other classes is coming to that sort of head as well. So it's good. We're not there yet, but it's good to be aware of that coming down the pike. Thanksgiving is really late this year, so we have that piece off, and then there's really only like a week of classes left after that. But anyway, that's jumping a little too far ahead. So let's go back to Unit 8, wrapping up our poetry. So this is, I think, a really fun unit. Hopefully you think so too. And it's a little bit, I don't want to say less demanding, but it's not a lot of content that you have to produce, which is actually kind of a nice break. We've been doing a lot of content-heavy stuff where you're writing a lot or researching a lot or building a lot of stuff, and this is a little bit less of that. But I think it's really valuable and really interesting because we want to think here, as we close out our look at poetry in our Intro to Lit class, about how my contention is that it's both a very marginal thing, like if you ask the average person if they read poetry or write it or engage with it on a regular basis. Maybe someone took a class, maybe in 8th grade someone wrote a poem, but most people, right, they don't really think of it that much. It's not a central part of what they do. So my contention, though, is that not only is poetry everywhere in people's just everyday lives, but despite it being kind of like this marginal out there thing, it's also really central in our public and private lives as well. Not just in the spaces we inhabit out there in the world, but, think of how often big events, whether they're really happy and kind of celebratory, or maybe more melancholy and kind of sad, but we often turn to poetry to mark those really big events, whether they're personal, like, a birthday, or a birth, a wedding, a death, funeral sort of a thing, or they're more public kinds of events as well. We turn to poetry to mark those. So all of a sudden it's like this thing that apparently nobody reads or writes or thinks about is actually everywhere, right? It's really central to us. So we're going to start by reading/watching, or listening to, I guess you might say, the lyric/poem called Hip Hop by Mos Def. Really awesome song, great lyrics, really literary, really thoughtful, but also really cool to listen to. And then we're going to do this Padlet assignment. So Padlet is a tool that I like to use here and there, and it is like this digital corkboard thing, right? You visit this URL on your smartphone. Just open up your whatever native browser is built into your smartphone, type in this URL, and you will be at our Padlet, here, our digital corkboard. There's a little plus icon down in the corner. You can barely see it on my screen capture here. And then I think you can also double tap or click anywhere, and it will allow you to do a post. You can take a picture in real time. You can actually upload like a short video. It's really the picture that I'm looking for here. So what we're going to do is be on the lookout for poetry everywhere out there in the world. Again, I sort of explain how I feel like it's both sort of a marginal thing, has a lot of negative baggage attached to it sometimes. But if we think about it and are on the lookout for it, it's like everywhere out there. And so this is why I say this unit is not a lot of you like generating content. You're not, writing a an essay or preparing a slide deck or doing anything like that. You're really just taking pictures. But you have to be on the lookout because this is designed to be a mobile assignment. So you're just sort of doing it or thinking about it as you're doing your daily life. You don't take half an hour out of your time and go looking for poetry. That sort of defeats the purpose. We want to find it like hiding in plain sight, basically. So there's a couple of caveats, and they're really important here. We are looking for actual poetry. So real words arranged in space on in a physical place. So not just something that you think, like an image that you think is poetic, like people holding hands or sunrise or sunset. It's poetic, but that's not poetry. It's not actual language out there in the world. Similarly, we don't just want to pull like the poetry book off the shelf or the literature anthology and turn to a page of poetry and take a picture. That's not poetry either, at least as we're looking for it. Of course, it's poetry as language, but it's in a poetry book. It's where we would expect to see it. So that doesn't really work for our purposes. And again, as you look for examples, really look for those that are in physical spaces, not just digital things that you can sort of find on your phone. And try to find examples where you feel like the arrangement of the words in that space, whether it's a print thing that you could hold in your hand or a big billboard or whatever the size of it. But the arrangement of the words seems to have been like intentional on whoever the author's part is, whether it's a single author or what most people find is just some sort of like anonymous or corporate authorship. Because truthfully, marketing of most kinds usually takes the form of poetry. It's language used for intense effect, arranged in a particular way on the space of the page. It's not just arranged in like the language that is arranged here. There's really no line breaks. It's just like sentences after sentences after sentences. So this is prose. Clearly I use the language to have an effect, but I haven't really managed the space of the page. It's just like is what it is, right? You want to look for examples, again, actual words, actual language, existing in a real physical space, but you get the sense that there's something like literary going on there. There's something like it's trying to be poetry. It's not necessarily presenting itself as poetry, that's like the whole point, but it's really working like poetry. So of course what we discover is that poetry, this thing that we think is very marginal, it's only in the English lit textbook, is actually out there all over the place. We just have to be vigilant to find it. So that's what you're going to do. Again, not producing a whole lot of content, but populating our little Padlet here with your examples. There's no like app to download necessarily. There's no account that you have to have. You can just sort of do it in real time, but that means that all the posts will be tagged as anonymous because nobody's like signing in or whatever. So to get credit, you have to, oops, I moved my own post around. You have to make sure that you include your name in the post. So you're going to want to post your image. Maybe there's a little discussion or like text that you can add kind of explaining where you are, what we're looking at, why you think it's poetry out there, and of course your name for grading purposes. So hopefully you have some fun with it. It's a little break from like lots of heavy content generation type thing. And what's really fun is that as the week goes on or the days go by and people start to do this, you'll see other examples populate in here. So if you're really, really stuck, maybe you'll see a few examples that kind of train your eye for what to look like, or what to look for, honestly. And it's really fun, to be truthful, at the end of it to see like how poetry is just all over the place out there. We just don't really look for it in the way that we are here. So kind of an easier unit in some ways, but I think actually more challenging in other ways. And that'll wrap out nicely our series of poetry units for our class. And then, like I said, we move into drama. So again, quick look at due dates, keeping everything on track here. Finished up our fiction, done a couple poetry things, finishing this up, replies as usual, and then moving into our Padlet assignment. Okay, so as usual, if you have any questions, concerns, be in touch with me, and I will talk with everyone soon.